The Ag Tribes Report is brought to you by Legacy Interviews, a video service that captures people as they really are, so the future knows who they really were. Here's Legacy Interviews guest Steve Alt on the importance of preserving stories for future generations today.
I grew up with my dad and my uncle all the time, and I heard all the old stories. When the kids and the grandkids want to remember what happened those years ago, I think it's a really good idea. Legacies, I mean, it made me nervous, don't get me wrong, when he first starts talking about all this stuff. But, you know, if you keep waiting so long, the memories do fade. I'm not saying I'm getting old, but when you can relax enough to get into it, that's where the stories come from.
Welcome to the Ag Tribes Report, a breakdown of the top stories affecting the culture of agriculture, with your host, Vance Crowe. The report begins in 3, 2, 1. Let's begin.
Welcome to the Ag Tribes Report. I'm your host, Vance Crowe. Each week, I bring on a co-host to represent the perspectives of one of the many ag tribes that collectively make up U.S. and Canadian agriculture. This week, we have Kenny Bergmann, Executive Vice President of S&H Farm Supply, Chairman of the Board of FCS Financial, and on his local school board. Kenny operates at 500 owned acres and rents an additional 700 acres in Missouri, raising alfalfa, grass hay, wheat, fescue seed, and oats, along with 200 head cow-calf operation and backgrounding up to 150 head. Kenny, welcome to the podcast.
Well, Vance, thanks for having me on. I promise not to create too much reputation risk for you.
So Kenny and I know each other because we're on the FCS Financial Board, and I always am surprised that I'll be talking with Kenny, and he will reference things that people said in conversation, combines it together with his knowledge of what's going on in the world. So what have you been paying attention to lately, Kenny?
Well, I've been watching a lot of things at the national level. I don't think national leadership has ever been more interesting than it is today. And I think it's never been harder to accomplish meaningful change. There's a lot of self-centeredness in all of our leadership. And the things that we fight about today don't have a lot of elasticity in them. They're things that I think people are pretty deeply rooted in their beliefs that separate us as a country.
Yeah, I mean, when you say today, I mean, today is one of the most wild days of news that I've seen, and so far it hasn't resulted in, people dying or crazy catastrophe. But with Elon Musk and Donald Trump having a fallout, at first I thought maybe this is like WWF wrestling, and they're going to try and do good guy, bad guy. But you see Elon Musk come out and say Donald Trump is on the Epstein, files, and that's why they haven't released it. These two are not joking around. This is pretty serious.
Let's go into a bad place.
Well, we are going to talk about things that are related not just to national level WWF wrestling. We're going to talk about Corteva's controversial letter threatening farmers using generic herbicides on GMO crops, where they put in an anonymous snitch line, and we're going to examine whether this is a good idea. We're also going to talk about the 2 Chinese nationals charged with smuggling crop-destroying fungal pathogens into the U.S. through the Detroit airport. And we're going to talk about an article written by Chris Bennett about Alabama landowners suing game wardens who have been conducting warrantless property searches under the open fields doctrine. We're going to do this, plus the Bitcoin land price report. We're going to hear Kenny's Peter Thiel paradox and talk about his worthy adversary, and we're going to try and do it in just 30 minutes. So let's get started. Headline number 1, Corteva sends customers threatening letter about using generic products on GMO crops. Corteva has sent a letter to technology use agreement holders warning them against using generic 2,4-D herbicides on their enlist crops. In a move reminiscent of Monsanto's aggressive biotechnology protection tactics, the May 5th letter states that Corteva has received allegations of non-compliant crop production recommendations and applications taking place over top of enlist crops, and informs that generic enlist products should not be used. The company emphasized that only their branded Enlist 1 and Enlist Duo herbicides containing 2,4-D may be used with these enlist crops. claiming that products provide significant benefits to growers, including near zero volatility and the reduced potential for physical drift. However, farmers on message boards are reacting extremely negative to this tactic, which includes, quote, proactive in-person audits during the 2025 growing season, meaning they're going to send people out there to check to see if you're using regular enlist. So, Kenny, Corteva is acting to protect its interests. It's a bold move to send a letter with an anonymous tip line in it. How do you think this approach is going to play out for them?
Vance, I would guess that this doesn't land well with farmers. You know, we use a lot of technology. Technology is intertwined in a lot of things, whether that's crop genetics, whether it's cattle traceability, whether it's right to repair on farm equipment. And I think this relationship between users, dealers, and manufacturers really requires a lot of communication and trust. And when that trust is gone, it becomes a tough relationship to manage because the pieces are scattered. They're hard to ascertain. You know, when something's determined to be manipulated, or if you're using the wrong product on, you know, in something generic to replace enlist and trying to save $1, you know, is that the applicator? Is that the owner? Who's at fault? Where does, you know, I know that the purchaser of the seed is the one who agreed to the technology agreement in that transaction. But I would guess that most of these enforcement activities lead to a damaged relationship.
Yeah, you know, having worked at Monsanto after they had done a lot of these actions, when biotech was first coming on, they signed exactly the technology agreement you were talking about, which said, hey, I'm not going to do this. And then Monsanto felt a lot of pressure to go out there and check to make sure people weren't doing it, because if one farmer is following all the rules and another farmer right next to him isn't following the rules, that guy has a huge advantage over him. And so they went out trying to enforce it. But when the public heard about this, the way they heard about it was, hey, some guys in black SUVs and dark sunglasses showed up on my field, snuck into it, checked it, and, you know, wrote up fake things and accused me of doing things. So whether or not this was truly the case or not, the reputation hit that Monsanto took for it, I think in large part maybe cost them the company 15 years later.
Yeah, I think that, you know, we have a long memory out here on the farm. And so we want to do business with people we trust and they trust us. And the fact is that we have to find a way to pay for the investment in technology. That's real. And Corteva needs to be rewarded for their investment and their development, because it changes the world. It helps us feed people more efficiently, and improves our production efficiency. But, you know, the challenge is how they get paid for that. Is the way they get paid for it in only buying their branded product, you know, or do we have more of an upfront? Here's the fee to buy the seed rather than the product that you put over the top.
Yeah, and I mean, I can only imagine the discussions they were having in the Corteva room, because if you're using a generic 2,4-D that volatilizes and floats off of your field and goes and kills another farmer's crops or their trees, or all of a sudden, you know, other things are killed in a neighbor's yard, nobody's going to look and say, was that generic or was that 2,4-D? They're going to say that was 2,4-D, and all of a sudden people's congressmen are going to get called and lawsuits are going to happen, and they're going to get swept up in this. So it is an incredibly complicated thing, but, you know, you never feel good about setting up a situation where neighbors can report on one another. That's not a good look either.
That's pretty tough.
All right, moving on to headline number 2, a story that made headlines all over the United States. Chinese nationals charged with smuggling crop-destroying pathogens into the U.S. 2 Chinese nationals, Yunqing Jinyan and Zunyong Liu, face federal charges for smuggling Fusarium granizarium into the United States. The fungal pathogen, classified as a potential agro-terrorism weapon, was discovered hidden in tissue inside of Liu's backpack in the Detroit Metropolitan Airport. This fusarium causes head blight in wheat, barley, and corn and produces toxins harmful to humans and livestock. While it is common in nature, introducing resistant or toxic strains could devastate agriculture and disrupt food security. The fungus is classified as a select agent due to its potential agricultural impacts. FBI investigators revealed the pair had discussed smuggling biological materials multiple times, including in 2022, an attempt where Jian had hid material in his shoe, and a 24 effort to mail the fungus inside of a textbook, which was intercepted by customs. Both researchers plan to study the pathogen at the University of Michigan without the required USDA permits, violating biosecurity laws. Jian, a University of Michigan researcher, is funded by the Chinese government, faces charges including conspiracy, smuggling, false statement, and visa fraud. Liu was sent back to China and is unlikely to face U.S. charges due to lack of an extradition treaty. The University of Michigan condemned the actions and confirmed it received no Chinese funding for the research. So, Kenny, the news cycle is so fast, this story came and then was quickly forgotten about. But do you think this was a serious breach by the U.S., by the Chinese government, or is this just some overzealous academics that didn't think about the consequences?
Well, I think there's probably a 50-50 chance that it could be either, Vance. And at the end of the story, I don't know that it would matter if it was intentional bioterrorism or if it was just ignorance of what they could cause had that pathogen been released and our crops be damaged with something that might take years for us to recover from. And I think that's the thing that stands out to me is, wow, whether this was intentional or whether it was an act of ignorance, I'm just impressed by our customs people that they could detect a bacteria in a shoe or something that's turning milk. That gave me confidence that we do have a certain level of protection, especially after the last 2 years of the discussion of our open southern border. It's like this is the exact opposite. We're watching some things really closely, and we're doing a good job of watching over production agriculture. So that gave me a bolster of my confidence in our ag department, our customs agents, that they could detect and stop this kind of activity, whether it was ignorance or whether it was intentional.
Absolutely. I agree with that. That's a great perspective, because it is astonishing to me that these guys have been doing this over and over again. And my sense from reading pretty deeply into this story is twofold. On the one hand, I am sure that the bureaucracy to be able to study these types of pathogens, I'm sure it is absolutely absurd. I'm sure it's hoop jumping like you wouldn't believe. But these are the very people that understand on a deep level just how dangerous this is. And so to your point about it, does it really matter whether they had malintent or not? My father has this saying, whether the rock hits the pitcher or the pitcher hits the rock, it's bad for the pitcher. We can't allow this at all. I think this is, throw the book at them, because you need to make sure that nobody tries to do this.
That's right. And you have to increase and bolster your efforts to stop more of it, because every time something comes up and bubbles up, it causes somebody else to think about doing a similar kind of thing.
Yeah, and I am one of the most anti-TSA people out there. I always think they miss everything. I've gotten to hotels after flying and found out I've had a relatively large pocket knife in there, all kinds of things. So I don't think they're very good. But you're right. Like, not only did they catch this one, they caught one in an academic book, and They also have found out they were able to look into their text messages. So bravo to whoever's on border security right now.
Yeah, and to the point, whether it was intentional or ignorance, I love one of the Warren Buffett quotes, and that is, "The absence of stupidity is of far greater value than the presence of genius."
Probably true. The thing I think was scariest about this is it had real ramifications. When I looked into this fusarium and how quickly it can spread, particularly in really wet conditions like we're having right now in Missouri, this is not something that should just pop out of the headlines. I mean, there's so many news stories going on. This was a pretty serious overreach. So I was glad to cover this, because I think it didn't get nearly enough time for people to realize just how serious this was. All right, moving on to headline number 3. Alabama landowners sue game warden over warrantless property searches. Former Ag Tribes Report guest Christopher Bennett from Farm Journal reported this week on a stunning case that reveals the staggering overreach of game wardens have in the U.S. 3 Alabama residents have filed lawsuits challenging a state statute that allows game wardens to enter private property without a warrant or consent. Dalton Boley, Regina Williams, and Dale Lillies partnered with the Institute for Justice to contest Alabama Code Section 9265, which grants game wardens the authority to, quote, enter upon any land in the performance of their duty, end quote, without requiring a warrant or probable cause. The plaintiffs, who owned marked private properties with no trespassing signs, have experienced multiple intrusions. Williams owns 10 acres in Killen, where she lived her entire life. Lillies owns 85 acres where he uses for hunting with his grandchildren, and none of the landowners have been charged with hunting violations. The law reflects the federal open fields doctrine, which exposes about 96% of all private land, roughly 1.2 billion acres, to warrantless searches. However, the lawsuit argues that this violates the Alabama Constitution protections against unreasonable search and seizures. The Institute for Justice has successfully challenged similar laws in Tennessee and has ongoing cases in Pennsylvania and Louisiana. So, Kenny, what's your take on this balance between wildlife enforcement and private property rights?
I think it's a legitimate issue, Vance. First, I want to say that I have a great appreciation for the Missouri Department of Conservation. And, I can think back to the days when I was a child. I remember seeing our first white-tailed deer that I ever saw in the wild. I was probably 8 or 9 years old, and that was quite an event because they were simply not there before. And now they're everywhere. I nearly hit 3 this morning. And so it's become a routine sight there in our yards. They eat our flowers, and I'm an outdoorsman. I love to hunt and fish. But most states, and in Missouri, we have an independent commission that has a board that's appointed by the governor, and they really have no regulatory oversight by our legislature. They are governed by that commission, and so they're largely the wildlife code that they develop goes unnoticed or unchecked by the public. There's not as much of a sunshine that's shown on it. And when you get to thinking about it, if you want to get a little concerned, pick up a copy of the Wildlife Code and read it. Understand that if your buddy goes fishing, catches a limit of fish, cleans them, gives you some to eat, and you don't eat it all in that setting, you put some in your freezer, and an agent were to come to your home and search, and you didn't have the date and the license number of the harvester of that, you might be in trouble.
It's laws like this, they start off from a place of, hey, we want to make sure that everybody has wildlife. You can't just protect it on these 10 acres and not those 10 acres. But it seems to me that just like all bureaucracy, it is spread out and become so powerful that, when you go read Chris Bennett's story on this, he's talking about game wardens coming on, turning their cameras around so they couldn't be seen, and then coming and installing their own cameras on their property. It like the things these game wardens are doing seem completely inexplicable. Like, what purpose could you have doing these things? And right now, without this kind of larger push to sue them, you're left just to the devices of an independent game warden that can basically do what he wants as long as he says it's in service of his duty.
Yeah, I think therein lies a lot of the risk. I think this all comes down to an individual integrity, right? And how do you view your role? And anytime you empower an agency or a group of people with that much unfettered power or lack of oversight, you create a lot of risk that they will behave in a population-friendly manner, right? And that they will keep true to their purposes and not let things become personal or just overstep because the authority is there and it gives them something to do.
This is just a shout out to Chris Bennett, who I think is one of the best reporters in all of the United States, because he's bringing a light to this. He pointed out this concept called curtilage, which I did not understand, and it is worth every listener here understanding. Curtilage is the area that you use. You kind of mow around it. This is the area you keep cleaned up around your house. Anything outside of that curtilage, if you have like a little bit of woods behind your house, the game warden can come and put on a camera, and it can be facing your house. As long as they don't come into the curtilage part of it, where you're mowing and where you keep it up, they're totally within their rights. And this has prompted several of my friends to really push back how much area they mow, how much lawn they have, because that actually makes them feel like, hey, I need to be able to push, the government from being able to look right into my yard.
Yeah, I think we all feel a little presence with Big Brother technology, satellite drone activity, night vision. There's just a lot of things that I think when, there's more need for conversation about what are agents doing, what are their purposes, what's their involvement in the community. They have a lot of good things that they do. We need to know whenever there's operations going on or they need to be on our property. I think there should be some communication to us that they're going to be there.
Well, that is going to do it for this week's headlines. If you have news that you think I should report this week, it was all sent to me by listeners. You can send it to me, Vance@legacyinterviews.com, or of course on X @VanceCrow. All right, moving on to the Bitcoin land price report. Last week, Bitcoin was at 106,000, and today we're sitting at 101,000, which means we're down nearly 5% from last week. So, Kenny, where do you live, and how much does an acre of good quality farmland cost in terms of US dollars?
So, Vance, I'm in Southwest Missouri, where our primary crop is ticks and ragweed, and the subsoil is rock that's about a half inch below the surface. So, here land values have increased significantly in the last few years, like most places. But a good acre of land here is going to sell in that $5,500, $6,000 range. And it's pretty consistent. Doesn't change much by size of tract or what type of ground it is.
All right. Well, with Bitcoin sitting at 101,000, an acre of high quality farmland being $6,000, that would mean that 1 acre is worth about 0.0591 Bitcoin. Or in other words, 1 Bitcoin would purchase you 16.9 acres in Kenny's County, Polk County. Is that right?
Polk County. Yep.
And how does that sit with you? 16.9 acres for 1 Bitcoin.
Well, I probably wouldn't trade any acres for a Bitcoin, even though I probably should. I don't understand it, but I do understand an acre of ground, and the numbers that you spit out there. My experience, I probably would have bought last week and sold this week.
So where are you at on Bitcoin? How do you feel about it? Are you familiar with the technology?
I just know enough to be dangerous, and I'm looking forward to you teaching me more, but I'm not afraid of it. I just don't know how to apply it to my life or investment strategy or equity.
Yeah, one of the things that I've really enjoyed about being on the FCS Financial board is like when you're going out to dinner or, in between sessions, the guys are more than happy to tell me that, like, I think you're crazy about this Bitcoin, but I would like to actually learn, how do you use a wallet? And it's shown me like there's a lot of people that the reputation farmers have for being slow on technology. Not these guys. These guys are open and willing to push on things. I love it.
I still like the gold standard, but I'm willing to look at Bitcoin.
Well, it seems like, with Elon Musk quitting and Donald Trump coming out and saying that he and Elizabeth Warren agree on one thing, which is to take off the debt limit ceiling. It seems like whether you're buying gold or Bitcoin, everybody should be putting money into scarce assets because they are going to print money to give themselves whatever they want. And I don't think anything stops this train.
I think Jerome Powell has his work cut out for him to get 2% inflation with this money creation.
Oh, gosh, it's going to be crazy. Well, I personally buy Bitcoin using river.com. And if you would like to buy Bitcoin and use a And where you buy that will support the show. Use the link in the show notes to buy Bitcoin. All right, we're going to move on from here into the Peter Thiel paradox, which I am super excited to hear Kenny's, because I think Kenny is one of the most thoughtful people I know. What is one thing that you believe that almost no one you know agrees with you on?
Vance, you asked me that question, and I thought about this quite a bit. I believe young people today can still start a farm and have a viable operation. And I think that's a challenge. Maybe it hasn't changed much in the last 40 years since the 80s, but it's still true. If that's what you want to do, if that's where the fire burns in you, is to be in production agriculture, you will find a way to do it. I did, and you can too.
When you say you did you come into farming with land? How did you approach this?
No, I grew up on a farm, beef, cattle, hogs. But my parents and grandparents, they needed their operations to remain viable to help fund their lifestyle. And so I worked and I learned there. But when my wife and I got married, we were renting little pieces of land here and there, putting together a cow herd. My son was born in September, and in about February, we went and took $5,000 from our savings account, got a first-time farm owner loan, swallowed hard, set that baby carrier on the lawyer's table, and thought, what in the world are we doing? And that first winter, we lived about 5 miles from the farm we bought, and the winter was tough that winter. We had a spring calving cow herd, and I remember being a young man, and that's what I mean. When you really want to do it, you'll do it. I drove over to that farm at 10 o'clock at night, 2 o'clock in the morning, 6 o'clock in the morning to check those cows all winter long. Lost one calf, but we needed every one of them to make that payment. And you will find a way if you want to do it bad enough.
I think that is a really strong Peter Thiel paradox, because this is something that has become almost a truism. Oh, you can't get into farming. It's not possible. And I think it feels really good to hear somebody say, no, you can, but it's maybe going to cost you, a winter of sleep, and that's not going to be fun. And it may not work out. I mean, you knew you had a lot of risk doing that, but it's, I like this one.
The fire's either in you or it's not, Vince. And I have conversations with producers every day in my role at SNH, and the ones who are truly successful, they have a fire burning within them, and it's not a job to them. It's not like anything else you would do. It's a passion that they are driven to produce. They love to see the land bring forth life. They love to see the production cycle. They love the art of farming. They love the science of farming. Everybody has their own way that they will figure it out. And there's not a template that I can give anybody other than to say, if you want it bad enough, you will find the way.
When I joined the FCS Financial Board, I remember they were talking like, we want to support young farmers. And, you kind of roll your eyes at that. But then I've actually been in the conversation about how much risk are we willing to take? And, there's some of them aren't going to be able to make it. And like, there are real organizations like FCS Financial that are willing to take risks on people. And it's really surprised me and delighted me. But just to your point, getting the money is not enough. You're going to have to do some crazy stuff. Yeah. All right. Well, I'm going to give you a solid 7.5 on this. I think it's a good one because people don't believe it, but not too controversial, and it feels good. I kind of want you to be right in a way.
I'll take that.
All right. Now moving on to the worthy adversary. This is where we spotlight an individual that we respect, but you don't necessarily agree with. So that we kind of widen out who are we listening to. So Kenny, who is your worthy adversary?
Oh, that's a great question, Vince. I haven't found that there's an individual who's maybe a worthy adversary. There's a lot of things that I like to battle. One of the things that I hate with a passion is when I encounter someone and I say, how are you doing today? And they say, I'm just living the dream. And it's like, that's a very derogatory way to talk about being at the top of the food chain in a first-class country where you don't have to worry about what you're going to eat that day, where you're going to sleep that night, if your country is secure, if you're protected by fire protection, police protection. So I guess my pushback is against the lack of appreciation for the things that we enjoy in America, in the United States of America, probably more than anyone that I would debate about an individual topic. I've told a lot of people have asked me, what's the best product here? And I'm a firm believer that there's not a best for everyone, but there's a best for you and a best for me. And we have to do our due diligence to figure out what our real need is and what we need to accomplish and what our capacity is to accomplish that.
I think you're in a very interesting position. You have been on several boards. You're an executive at a large farm equipment company, and you do have a way about getting along with people. And I think that has something to do with the way that you view people. They aren't people that come into conflict. You don't really seek it out, but you're open to a diversity of opinions. What have you learned by being on boards and in your leadership positions?
Well, boards are people. People have opinions, and opinions are fine. Our decisions should be made by things that are a lot deeper seated than that. And I guess I was blessed early in life to spend a lot of time around mature people and people that made me think. And someone gave me some guidance early on in life that I've never forgotten. And that was, we should spend most of our time thinking about and developing those things that we would be willing to die for. What are the things in our life that we would stand up and fight to the death for? Not things that we would fight about or go around or to or argue about. The things we'd be willing to die for. What are those things? Identify them, guard them like you would give your life for it. And I think, to me, there aren't very many of those things. And I find that most people agree on most of those things. And when you take it and you boil it down to that level, you can find common ground, and then you can build from there to see where you want to go with most decisions.
Yeah, I think that's great. I think so much of our time is spent arguing over something that as soon as it passes, we no longer have strong feelings. Volcano erupts in Iceland, and all of a sudden we're volcano experts, and then we're fusarium experts, and we get really passionate about it, but we don't really care about it. But if you really boil it down to what matters and what you really care about, what you'd be willing to die for, that changes how many things you'd engage your time and attention on. Yeah.
I mean, somebody else is going to deal with all these problems when I'm not here on this earth any longer. And the problems are still going to exist because where there's people and there's weather and there's disaster, there's problems, right? And we're going to disagree on some ways and how to handle those. I'll use our current political landscape maybe as a point to talk to. And I think, I've told many people I would support a candidate who would go to Jefferson City or to Washington, D.C. and would promise never to introduce new legislation outside of something that would rescind a currently existing regulation or, put freedom back in our country, maybe push a decision from the national level back to a state level. I think we have far more bills that are introduced today. They're almost all to create an advantage for some group of people rather than truly to protect freedom or our country.
I mean, you're singing my song. I am all about, let's just throw as many rules out as we possibly can. Make the rules that we enforce, because that truly every law is enforced at the end of a gun. It doesn't matter whether it's a seatbelt law. It doesn't matter. It could be anything. It's all done at the end of a gun. And really, if you think about how much should we be willing to use force? Because right now, most of democracy is about I'm going to use those police officers to enforce this law. And, we just keep stacking more and more and more laws on, and that makes everybody criminals, and it gives certain people a lot of power and other people to be subject to it. So I'm totally with you. If whatever that party is that is slash and burn laws, I'm all about that.
Yeah. And there are laws that are meaningful. There are laws that are important, but there are a lot of regulations. There are a lot of code that just gives certain groups of people in our society an advantage. And those are not the way to govern, in my opinion.
Well, this is going to do it for the show. But before we wrap up, we are just 2 short Sundays away from Father's Day. So I thought I'd ask you, Kenny, a question about your dad. When you look back, you're a grandpa now. In what way do you see your father showing up in the way that you are a parent or a grandparent?
Well, Dad loved people, and he was a pretty straight shooter. And I always loved the outdoors, and he was always trying to accomplish something. And so I can remember when I was a young man, I wanted to go hunting. I said, Dad, let's go hunting. And he would say something like, well, yeah, sure, jump in the truck. I'll grab the chainsaws. And I thought, why are we using chainsaws to go hunting? And I knew we were going to cut wood and pretend to be hunting. So I know myself well enough to know he was fueled by accomplishment. I tend to be fueled by accomplishment. And so turning playtime into some type of a teaching environment, whether that be gardening or livestock, or saying, hey, come ride in the tractor with Pawpaw. Combining work and play is probably the key thing that I would point out.
I love it. I absolutely love that. There are so many people when they get a legacy interview, they buy it, for their parents. Hey, we want to record your story. But really what they're thinking is, a lot of men, I've heard them say this, is I want my kids to see this so they can know why I am the way that I am, because they can see what dad or what grandpa was like. Because we all are, like, we're all the dads. There's so much of our dad in us when we're raising our own kids.
Yeah. I can remember when my grandkids are just getting to ball playing age. And I can remember my dad saying to you, I'm going to throw the ball at your head and you will learn to catch it.
That's a good one. All right. And Kenny, if people wanted to learn more about something you're interested in, where would you point their attention to?
Yes. So if you want to learn more about SNH or SNH Country, just go to sandhcountry.com. We have an extensive website there. You can check out all our links. If you want to learn about FCS Financial and Farm Credit System, go to myfcsfinancial.com. Good groups of people in both organizations can help you find what you need.
Well, thanks for coming on, Kenny. All right, that's going to do it for the Ag Tribes Report. It was so great to have Kenny on. If you are interested in getting your father a legacy interview, go to legacyinterviews.com. You can click on the contact page and sign up for a quick phone call with me. I did about 4 calls just today. Our schedule is pushing way out into July, but it is really an exciting time. And if you want to capture your dad's stories so your kids know why you are the way you are, a legacy interview is a great way to do that. Also, I will throw a link to river.com into the show notes. And if you want to buy Bitcoin there, that'll support the show. So, all right, that's going to do it for this week's show. As always, feel free to disagree.